Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel, and I guess this is episode 3 now. We're really moving along on the CJ2A, the 46 that we're working on the front end stuff. We're continuing on from the last 2 episodes. Haven't really done anything with the 87. That's coming up here pretty soon because it's kind of sitting there not doing anything. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of where we left off the last time. What we've done here is taken apart the passenger side and installed new bearings underneath these bearing caps here and here. And what I'm going to go over here is something that's pretty relatively available on the internet. So I'm not going to show taking these caps off and inserting the new bearings in the races. It isn't that big of a deal, but I will show you how you check the proper torque that's supposed to be on these bearings that are in here and here with a push-pull gauge. And give me just a minute to set that up. I'll put the hook in it. So I believe it's between 12 and 16 foot-pounds of pull on this that you're supposed to have for preload on the bearings. So what we'll do is we'll put this little hook in our fish scale and we'll pull from where the tie rod end hooks up into. So we'll turn it on. And if you can see that, it's at 0. We'll turn off the peak, and we're looking for no more than 16 pounds as we're moving it. So it might float up past it, but as long as we're moving it, not the torque that it takes to initiate it, but as it's moving. So it might go over 16 to start. So if you see there, it's about 12.2, 13.2 or so as we're pulling it, and I pulled it a little bit hard. So we'll start over. As you see, it's moving. It's right around 12, 13 as it's moving. So what you don't want it to do is just flop back and forth with just the slightest amount of push on there. If you find that it's below that amount, what you have to do is take the caps off. On the older ones, this cap down here is the same size as this cap up here. So my caps are the same size. After a while, I guess Willys figured out that this cap can be a little bit thicker on the bottom, and then you can just shim the top as you need. So just a moment, I'll get the shims out of the box. The factory comes with like 3 or 4 different sizes. If you ever buy a shim kit, typically they're all the same size. So what I've done is I started off with 5 of these. I think they're probably 10,000ths or something like that. They're not that thick. And I've worked it down. On the older ones, because they are the same on the top and the bottom, you need to take shims in and out evenly. So you can't take out 2 here and leave 3 and up here. You need to do, if you take out 2 here, you need to take out 2 down here as well. And if you take those out, that would mean you're in a condition where it's too loose. So what you're attempting to do is make it tighter fitting. If it's too tight, then we're going the opposite direction and we're installing 1 shim on the top, 1 shim on the bottom each time. It just gets a little old after a while because obviously, as you can see, there's 4 bolts per cap and they like to fight. I've got 1 more lock washer to put in here and the brake line guard. I left that on there so I'll remember because I forget everything. So anyway, this side is pretty well set up. When I took this axle out, it is the Bendix type that has the balls. If you're familiar with these style, instead of using the typical U-joint like a Spicer joint or what you would see on a drive shaft, they started off with a little bit more primitive style where they have the axle, the inner and the outer are shaped like this, and then there's ball bearings in each corner, and then 1 in the center that kind of keeps it together so that it can't pull apart. And the spacing between where it sets up against the axle or the axle housing on the inside and the actual spindle on the outside is very critical. And some people, when they would put these free-floating lockouts or free-floating axles in here where you could lock them in and lock them out, would cut off the end of the axle shaft that was threaded. And what would happen is that would float in there too much and prematurely wear out those ball bearings inside here. So Willys has come up with a little bit better design. I can't remember how they pronounce it. It's Rizepa or something like that. A little bit better, and then ultimately they use what you see now in most of your modern front ends is the Spicer style or the typical U-joint you see in a drive shaft. So luckily for me, I had some extra spare parts for this axle. So this axle here and this axle are supposed to be together like so. And as you can see, those ball bearings in there, and that's not all grease, I know it looks like it's pretty greasy, are pretty much one with the axle shaft now. As you can see, there's some remnants of it. The one in the center is completely gone, and this is what happens when this space and this space is allowed to do this, and those ball bearings are allowed to ride out of where they're supposed to be and their intended design. As you can see, this is a pretty loose. The ultimate goal here is allow you to turn the steering wheel and still maintain constant velocity or be able to turn it at the same time. So when that distance between here and here is allowed to do this, again, like I said, all of this comes apart and it breaks or prematurely wears out. So to combat that problem, and as you can see on the end, this one is threaded. Most people would cut that off so to facilitate the lockout design that goes in the end of this so that you can lock this out and just let it free spool. Can't do that. So this is the next design they came up with. As you can see, there's lots of moving parts going on in there. Lot better design, lot more to fix if you have to take it apart, but it does work, and it's a lot better than those 5 ball bearings in there that are a little bit harder to put back in the right spot and are critical on that measurement. So eventually we'll put that back in there when the time comes. So now on this side, the driver's side, when we first started out our series, we were talking about the reason why we took all of this apart was to replace this wheel cylinder and these brake pads and put them in there the correct way. As you can see, and I've talked about every time on this, the secondary shoe runs the entire length of the metal backing plate. On the primary shoe, the one in the front, it runs almost all the way with this much of the backing plate still exposed. When I did this as a kid, I thought I knew everything. I just put them on there. They all looked alike to me. Nobody ever told me that there was different sizes or different types of shoes, i.e. primary and secondary. So consequently, I don't know how I did it, but I ended up with 2 long ones on the driver's side and the 2 short ones, or the primaries, on the other side. So I wanted to fix that as well. And I think we've also talked about how these particular brakes do not have the auto adjusters in here. So it's all manual. You'll have to loosen the back nut. These are eccentrics, and when you turn these, it moves the shoe in and out. And if you've got one of these, you probably already know that. And if you read your manual, it tells you that in there as well. So I've loosely installed my bearings on here. I'm having a little drum problem at the moment. I attempted to change my drums out and then found out that the drums were the wrong ones, and I broke my drum. So we're waiting for that. I've just put the bearings back on here, and I've cleaned this up to the best of my ability right now. When I was a kid, I didn't have this nice pretty socket right here that fits over it and allows you to take it off without using a hammer and chisel. So of course I used the next best thing, the hammer and the chisel. The other thing we've done, now that I've got the torque set properly and the new bearings installed and the backing plate and the axle reinstalled, is I've put in here on the back side a new knuckle seal. And on the newer Jeeps and everything to follow, We do not have this closed knuckle design here, so you don't have to have all this stuff like this. But I put in a new felt and a new rubber washer on the back. And since this still is the Bendix style with the ball bearings on this side, I put the little tag back on it that says Bendix. Not that it'll ever probably come apart again, but it does look good anyway. I don't know if somebody notices it. Still working on the brake lines, and that's about as far as we've got. We've taken the tie rod ends off. Down here, I'm in the process of ordering new tie rod ends because, frankly, I don't really know which ones are good and which ones are bad. They all look bad to me right now, so I'm going to replace them because they're available. The next thing we're trying to do is, because my air compressor has died, I'm attempting to take off the pinion nut here. Don't laugh. It is a crude setup. Hopefully I'll get some assistance by our wonderful camera woman here. And we'll try to get it apart, and I've got a new pinion seal because when I had the axle tipped over slightly, the grease literally, or the 80-90 gear oil just literally ran up through the pinion seal. So it's pretty bad. Anyway, that's in the works. What else do we have going on besides that? Once I finish painting the front end with POR 15 or some good spray paint, we'll finish the brake lines. I'll work on the steering gear and the belt crank for the steering, and then the frame will be pretty happy. I think I have to bleed the brakes after that, and that's it. So we're moving right along. The next phase for the 87 is to attempt to clean out the nasty gas out of this plastic gas tank down here. I'm hoping to take out the rest of the fuel lines and pressure wash it out and get all that nasty good smelling stuff out of there. And then we'll roll the body out, or excuse me, the frame outside, and work on the body, and hopefully here in the next few weeks put it back on and catch all that. So thank you very much for hanging out again. Hopefully we'll do a first start. If we get bored enough with the 46 and the 87, we'll start working on the deuce and a half outside on its injector pump, and then we'll do a first start on it, and I think that'll be a little bit more interesting than this muddling around. So again, thanks for hanging out. If you like this, please hit that like button, share, subscribe, all those things YouTube wants you to do, and I appreciate it. Thanks for wrenching with Rob. Have a good night.